Haunted Roads by Perfect Elk. Rhode Island is a small state but rich in history and mystery, particularly for those intrigued by the paranormal. My friend and I have always been fascinated by haunted hotspots, and one place that consistently piqued our interest was Tower Hill Road in Cumberland. The road has a notorious reputation, with locals whispering about supernatural sightings and unsettling events. Some claim to have seen the ghost of a little child walking a dog, while others speak of Native American spirits restless from the violence from the French and Indian War. Drawn by these tales, we decided to explore the subject ourselves. It was a chilly, autumn evening when we set out, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the winding road. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the sense of anticipation grew. Tower Hill Road is only about a mile long, but it feels much longer, like it stretches into another realm. An inexplicable heaviness settled over us as soon as we turned onto the road. The air grew thick, making breathing hard, and a profound silence replaced the usual nighttime sounds. We rolled back down the window slightly, but even the crickets and owls seemed to be avoiding this place. An anxious feeling gnawed at my insides, making me hyper-aware of every rustle and creak around us. We drove slowly, peering into the dense woods on either side. The twisted and gnarled trees cast ominous shadows that danced in the car's headlights. Occasionally, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, but it vanished when I tried to focus on it. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the shadows, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing moment. About halfway down the road, we passed an ancient, towering tree that stood out. It was massive, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. Suddenly, my friend screamed, a blood-curdling sound that shattered the heavy silence around us. She swore she saw a figure standing by the tree watching us with glowing eyes. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. I tried to laugh it off, my nervous chuckle sounding hollow and forced, but my entire body felt heavy as lead. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, to get away from this place as fast as humanly possible. We pressed on, and the car was moving at a crawl now. The sense of paranoia was overwhelming, as if unseen eyes were dull into us from the dark. My friend gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin, her eyes wide with fear. She kept glancing back at the tree, convinced something was following us. As we neared the road's end, the dread intensified. The temperature seemed to drop, and I could see my breath fogging the windshield. Suddenly, a dog's mournful howl pierced the night, sending shivers down my spine. The faint, ghostly laughter of a child followed it. We both froze, listening intently, but the sounds faded as quickly as they had came. The oppressive atmosphere lifted instantly when we finally emerged from Tower Hill Road. We pulled over to the side, both trembling, trying to understand what we had experienced. The mile-long road had felt like an eternity, each second stretched by the palpable fear that clung to us. Looking back, I'm unsure what we encountered on Tower Hill Road. Was it spirits of those long gone, or were our minds playing tricks on us in the dark? Either way, the experience left an indelible mark on us. For anyone in Rhode Island, or New England for that matter, looking for an authentic paranormal experience, Tower Hill Road is a place you won't soon forget. But be warned, the road doesn't just lead you through Cumberland. It takes you deep into the unknown, where the past and the supernatural intertwine in the most unsettling of ways. The Creature of Block Island by Shory Knott. It was between 2005 and 2009, a time that blurs together in my memory. But I vividly recall the unsettling experience my father and I had on Block Island. We were there for an academic conference where my stepmother was giving a talk. As a young teenager, the trip was far from exciting for me. The weather was dreary, the most of my time was spent in the hotel room absorbed in a book. One afternoon, my dad decided to go for a walk. I didn't think much of it at the time. He left the room and I continued reading. The soft patter of rain against the window was the only sound that I heard. After what honestly felt like an eternity, but I'm probably just being dramatic, he returned, bursting into the room with such force that it startled me. His eyes had a wild look, a mix of fear and confusion that was entirely out of character for my father. He quickly shut the door behind him and crossed the window, closing the blinds, twitching the curtains aside and peering towards the beach as he did so. I asked him what was wrong, but he shook his head and just muttered, "Nothing." His demeanor was so off-putting that I didn't press further. Soon, I put it out of my mind entirely. It wasn't until we were back home, away from the island's oppressive atmosphere, that he finally opened up about it. My father is logical and academic, not usually prone to flights of fancy or superstition. For him to be visibly shaken and unsettled in itself was definitely a red flag. He sat us down and began his story, his voice tense and low. He walked down to the cliff edge where the land drops off towards the beach, enjoying the view of the old, weathered houses that lined the coast. One house in particular caught his eye. It was decrepit, seemingly abandoned, and his curiosity got the best of him. He picked his way down the dune cliffs toward the house, each step crunching on the loose sand. Upon reaching the house, he saw that the large wall section had collapsed, revealing the gutted interior. Intrigued, he approached the hole and peered inside. The interior was a wreck. The ceiling had caved in, allowing him to see straight up to the second floor. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed movement on the far wall. His heart skipped a beat as he focused on the source. There, clinging to the wall, was the shadowy shape of a large man. But this was no ordinary man. He had no legs and was climbing hand over hand up the wall, disappearing into the shadows of the second floor with an agility that defied explanation. The sight sent a jolt of terror through him. He stumbled back, his blood running absolutely cold. Panic set in, and he turned and ran, not stopping until he was safely back at the hotel. He finished the story with a haunted look, saying, "I'm not saying it was supernatural. I'm just saying I have zero rational explanation for what I saw, and I never want to return to the island again." Over the years, we've tried to rationalize what we saw. Was it a homeless person, perhaps an amputee, sheltering in an abandoned house? Or was it something else entirely? Is it a massive bat or some kind of optical illusion? None of our theories ever really seemed to explain the figure's sheer size and climbing ability fully. During our stay, I too felt a persistent unease. The island is just like completely foggy all the time. The weather's always pretty bad, the streets are silent. It has this heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Whether it's just the dreariness of the weather or something more, it felt as though the island itself was watching us. Block Island is known for its history and scenic beauty, but also has a darker, more mysterious side. Stories like my father's add to the island's eerie reputation. Has anyone else experienced something similar? Are we missing a rational explanation, or is Block Island a hotspot for the unexplained? Bike Path Attack by Oldest Millennial. The summer of 2001 in southern Rhode Island was a time of freedom and discovery for me. At 20 years old, I was between my junior and senior years at the University of Rhode Island. Wanting to make my senior year a bit easier, I stayed on campus, taking some summer classes. I rented a cute little apartment near campus with a friend, enjoying the proximity to the beach and the vibrant student life. Fitness had always been a big part of my life, and that summer, I fell in love with rollerblading. Every single day, I'd head down to the local bike path, a mile or so long stretch that connected two parks, gliding along with my music playing in my earbuds. It was my time to unwind and clear my mind. One morning in July, I was running late for my usual routine. I couldn't find my earbuds anywhere. I searched the entire apartment, frustration mounting, but they were nowhere to be found. Couldn't find them anywhere. Annoyed but determined not to let it ruin my day, I decided to go without them. I said screw it. I arrived at the park, laced up my rollerblades, and descended the path. The weather was beautiful, but dread washed over me about halfway through the mile. It was sunny, and the temperature was in the 80s, yet I had goosebumps. The hair on my neck stood up, and an intense, sinking feeling settled into my stomach. My intuition had never really failed me before, and it was screaming at me that something was awfully wrong. I suddenly became hyper-vigilant of my surroundings, scanning the path ahead like a hawk. That's when I saw him. A man, standing off the path's side, taking steps backwards as if to hide behind a tree. But it was too late. I had already seen him. He watched me with dead, predatory eyes, his hands in the pockets of an oversized hoodie clearly hiding something. He was not dressed for exercise. Jeans and work boots were hardly appropriate for the bike path. Panic surged through me, but I fought it down. I had a split second to decide. Stop and turn around, lose my momentum, or keep going and risk an encounter. Memories of past experience with violence and all kinds of things around that flashed through my mind. Anger and defiance replaced fear. Why should I live in fear? Why should I let this man dictate my actions? As I skated closer, I took in every detail of his appearance. His dark eyes and beard, the plain blue baseball cap, the hoodie, jeans, construction boots. I locked eyes with him, letting him see the rage and determination in my gaze. Our eye contact held for a few long, intense seconds, and he looked away. I knew he had decided against his plan, but I wasn't quite safe yet. I sped past him, heart pounding, and reached the second park. I quickly removed my rollerblades and began walking back to my car along the road parallel to the bike path. The mile-long walk in my socks felt endless, and I was acutely aware of every passing car, fearing he might be following me. When I finally saw my car, I broke into a run, locking myself inside as soon as I reached it. I never went back to that bike path again. But the story doesn't end there. That evening, after my shift at the restaurant, I returned to my apartment complex sometime around 10 p.m. My neighbor was pacing and smoking a cigarette in the parking lot. His face was streaked with tears, and he looked absolutely distraught. He and his girlfriend, who lived upstairs, had always been friendly to me. So seeing him so distressed, I approached and greeted him, worried. He told me his girlfriend was in the hospital. She had been attacked and violated by a stranger, suffering severe injuries, including a head wound from hitting the concrete. My heart sank, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I asked him, "Did it happen on the bike path?" His eyes widened in shock. "Yeah, how did you know?" he demanded. I explained that morning I had an encounter with somebody, describing the man in detail. He immediately asked if I could talk to the police, and of course I did. Because of that inner voice urging me to remember everything, I gave a full description. As much as I know right now, I don't think anybody's ever caught the guy yet. The girl recovered and moved out shortly after that. I don't blame them. The most chilling part of the story, however, was the mystery of the earbuds. The day after the incident, I found them where they were supposed to be on the kitchen counter. I knew they were not there when I looked, and my roommate hadn't taken them. It was as if some higher power had intervened, ensuring I stayed alert and aware that day. The Wendy's Intruder by Anonymous. My family and I travel to Rhode Island quite frequently during the summer months, and I always bring a friend or two to spend the time with me there. We only make day trips, so we only stayed there for a short period usually. On the way home, we stopped to eat in a city about midway between Rhode Island and where I live. My friends, my father, and I usually go while my mother stays in the car. The part we drove through in the city wasn't that safe, but we had no issues before this. Now on to the actual incident. We were heading home after a long and enjoyable day at the beach when we finally arrived in the city, where we stopped to find something to eat. My friend suggested Wendy's, and since she's our guest, I don't mind, so we stopped there. My father asked my mother if she'd like anything, and she tells him that she's actually going to come in with us since she needs to use the restroom. So we all get out, my dad locks the car, and we go in to order. We go in, we start ordering, and at this point my mother is back and we're all waiting for our food. As we're just about to leave, I turn around to see through the window that has a full view of the parking lot that there's a man who looks to be a bit older, maybe in his late 40s or so, looking through the passenger and driver's side of our car. I think he's perhaps mistaken. Maybe he thinks that it's his car. However, after about 2 minutes or so, he begins to hit the front passenger side window with quite a bit of force, seemingly trying to get into the car. At this point, I start freaking out and make my friend look. She started getting worried and we quickly got my dad. My father hands my mother all the food, rushes out to the car, and tells the man to screw off. He quickly enters his silver sedan with New York plates and speeds off. Sadly, we failed to take pictures of them as he was quite in a hurry to leave. After this fiasco, we hurry into the car and talk about why he was trying to get into the car so badly. It dawned on us that after about 45 minutes of talking, that my father's phone, which he had left charging on the console in plain view, was right there. We have honestly never stopped at a Wendy's ever again after this. I think we're kind of scarred, even though Wendy's has nothing to do with this. It still bothers me to think about it though. What would have happened if we didn't stop him from breaking into the car? Would he have just stolen the stuff, or would something worse have happened? Never Go Geocaching in the Woods by Julius C. I've been a geocacher for over a decade. For those who don't know, geocaching is a real-world outdoor treasure hunting game using GPS-enabled devices. Participants navigate to a specific set of GPS coordinates and then attempt to find the geocache or the container hidden at the location. The thrill of the hunt, the joy of discovering something hidden in plain sight, and the camaraderie of fellow enthusiasts have kept me hooked. I lead a small group of professional geocachers. We're known for tackling the most challenging hides that stump even the most seasoned of pros. Our latest obsession was a hide called the Devil's Puzzle. It had a difficulty rating of 5 out of 5, the highest possible. No one had logged a find since it was rumored to have been put up 2 years ago, and the cache owner had long since vanished from the community. Rumor had it that the coordinates led to an area of the woods notorious for its dark history of devil worship and human sacrifice. It was a cold, gray morning when we set out. My team consisted of Jim, a tech wizard with an uncanny knack for decoding even the most cryptic of clues, Sarah, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, and Mark, a local history buff who often provided crucial context about the areas we explored. We were ready for whatever the Devil's Puzzle could throw at us. At least, we thought so. The first coordinates led us to the edge of a dense forest locally known as the Dark Woods. The stories about this place were the stuff of urban legend. In the 1800s, it was said to be the site of occult rituals and gruesome sacrifices. People claimed to have heard chanting and to see strange lights and stuff at night. As we approached, an uneasy feeling settled over us. The trees seemed to close in, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The cache description was vague but mentioned a series of waypoints, with each of the puzzles leading to the next. The first clue was carved into an old, crumbling stone inside the tree line. Jim took out his equipment and began scanning it, while Sarah and Mark searched the area for additional hints. The stone bore a series of numbers and symbols. After just a couple of minutes, Jim cracked the code, and we were off to the next waypoint. The deeper we ventured, the darker and colder it became. The trees grew denser, blocking out the sunlight. We reached the second waypoint, a small, dilapidated cabin. Inside, the smell of decay was overwhelming. In one corner, we found a rusted metal box containing old photographs and scraps of paper with more symbols. Mark recognized the symbols used in old occult practices, but their meaning eluded him. After hours of piecing together the clues, we deciphered the following coordinates. As we trekked further, we noticed a strange silence. There didn't seem to be any birds, no rustling of leaves, just an oppressive stillness that lurked around every nook and cranny. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. Finally, we arrived at an old stone altar covered in moss and ivy. It was eerily pristine compared to the surrounding decay. This was the final waypoint. There was a metal box on the altar, similar to the one in the cabin. It was locked, but Jim had come prepared. He quickly picked the lock and we opened it to find a single, yellowed piece of parchment. On it was a hand-drawn map leading to the final cache location, deep in the heart of the woods. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me as we followed the map. The path led us to a clearing at the center of which was a large stone circle similar to those used in ancient rituals. In the center of the circle was a wooden box intricately carved with strange symbols. We approached with caution, the air heavy with an unseen presence. When we opened the box, we found a small, leather-bound journal. As I flipped through its pages, my hands began to tremble. The journal detailed the activities of a cult that had once operated in these very woods. It spoke of summoning rituals, human sacrifices, and a guardian bound to protect the cache's secrets. The last entry was a warning.
Those who seek this treasure will find only death.
Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a low, guttural growl emanated from the darkness beyond the clearing. We froze. Sarah screamed as a shadowy figure emerged from the trees, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. We bolted, adrenaline fueling our escape. As we ran, I could hear them, whatever them were, crashing through the underbrush behind us, its growls getting louder. We stumbled back to the cabin, barricading ourselves inside. The journal mentioned a way to banish the guardian, a ritual involving fire, and the symbols we had seen. Desperation fueled our actions as we recreated the symbols around the cabin and set fire to the journal. The air filled with an ear-splitting screech, and the ground shook violently. Then, there was silence. We waited until dawn before daring to leave the cabin. The forest felt different, lighter somehow. We returned to civilization, our faces pale and our hearts heavy. The authorities dismissed our story as a collective hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion, but we knew the truth. The devil's puzzle had been solved, but at a significant cost. We vowed to never return to those woods, leaving the secrets of the past buried where they belonged. And though we continued to geocache, the thrill of the hunt was forever tainted by the memories of what we unleashed in those cursed woods. I searched for the missing 411 by Andrew J. They always say curiosity killed the cat, but no one mentions what happens when curiosity gets the best of a human. My name is Lucas, and my curiosity nearly killed me. Or perhaps something worse. I have always been fascinated by mysteries and eerie tales of the unexplained. I was hooked when I first stumbled upon the lore of the missing 411 cases. People disappearing without a trace in national parks, especially Yosemite, was the perfect blend of intrigue and terror for my taste. In the spring of 2023, I decided to dig deeper into these mysteries. With my hiking gear, a sturdy tent, and enough provisions to last at least a week, I uncovered the secrets hidden within Yosemite National Park. The park's beauty is unparalleled, but beneath its serene surface, I felt an unsettling tension that gnawed at my resolve. Day 1 of my expedition was rather uneventful. I set up camp near the base of El Capitan, marveling at the sheer rock face towering above me. That day passed with nothing but the sound of chirping birds and rustling leaves. However, as night fell, a heavy silence descended upon the forest. It was as if the entire park was holding its breath. Around midnight, I awoke to the faint sound of a child's laughter. The sound was distant, almost ethereal. My rational mind told me it was just the wind playing tricks, but a more profound, primal part of me knew much better than that. I sat up, listening intently. The laughter grew louder, then abruptly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I didn't sleep well that night at all, to say the least. The next day, I hiked more profoundly into the wilderness, determined to reach an area with the most disappearances. The deeper I went, the less the park resembled the idyllic place I had visited. The trees seemed older, more gnarled and twisted, as if shaped by unseen forces. The air felt thicker, charged with an inexplicable energy. Sometime around noon, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, half hidden by the underbrush. My heart raced as I approached it, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside the cabin, it was an absolute shambles, as if abandoned in a hurry. Dust covered the furniture, everything lay scattered about and old. It was rusted, the stove in the corner, looking like it hadn't been touched in many years. But what caught my eye the most was a diary lying on the table, its pages absolutely yellowed with age and grime. The diary belonged to somebody named Henry, who had written about his solo hike in Yosemite in the early 1980s. His entries started rather normal, detailing his love for nature and peace in the wilderness. But as the days went by, his entries grew darker. He spoke of strange lights in the woods, whispers that seemed to follow him, and shadows that moved independently. His final entry sent chills down my spine.
They're watching me. They know I can see them. I don't think I'll make it out. If anyone finds this, beware the shadows. They're not what they seem.
As I read those words, a cold dread washed over my body. I decided to leave the cabin and continue my hike, but a nagging fear had taken root. As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering secrets I couldn't quite understand. That night, I made camp near a small clearing. I was too unnerved to sleep, so I sat by the fire, clutching my flashlight. The forest around me was deathly quiet. The sound of the crackling fire was all I could hear. Around midnight, I heard it again. A child's laughter. Closer this time, though. My blood ran cold as I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a child. Or at least, it looked like one. But there was something wrong. Something off about its features. Its eyes were too large, reflecting the fire like a cat. It just watched me with this unsettling intensity. I called out to it, but it didn't respond. Instead, it turned and walked back into the forest, vanishing into the shadows. I didn't sleep at all that night. How could I? As dawn broke, I packed up, continued my hike, hoping to put as much distance between myself and that clearing as humanly possible. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape that feeling of being watched. On the fourth day, I reached a remote area called Tenaya Canyon, which locals called the Bermuda Triangle of Yosemite. The area had an eerie beauty, but was filled with foreboding. Too exhausted to go further, I set up camp by the river. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. I built a fire and sat close by it to feel safe, my flashlight within reach the entire time. Somewhere around midnight, if I had to guess, the forest came alive with strange noises. Whispers echoed through the trees, and shadowy figures darted just beyond the firelight. My heart pounded as I saw the child again, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, I don't think it was alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, their eyes reflecting the firelight. They surrounded me, their whispers growing louder. Panic began to set in, and I grabbed my flashlight, shining at the figures. They recoiled but didn't disappear. Panic was still deep within my veins at this point. Their whispers filled my mind, incomprehensible, yet maddeningly persistent. Desperation took over, and I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I grabbed my backpack and sprinted into the forest, not caring where I was going or where I would end up. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent. The forest seemed to twist and turn around me, the trees closing in. I stumbled over roots and branches, my heart pounding as I desperately tried to find my way out. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing and collapsed, gasping for breath. The whispers were finally gone, replaced by an eerie silence once more. I looked around, realizing I had no idea where the heck I was. My GPS was useless, showing only static. Exhausted and absolutely terrified to my core, I set up a makeshift camp and waited for dawn. I found my way back to a familiar trail when morning finally came, but the experience had shaken me so much that I didn't really think I was thinking right until I finally found civilization, the oppressive feeling gradually lifting as I neared the park's edge. Back in the safety of my home, I tried to make sense of what had happened. The diary of the child, the whispers all pointed to something beyond my understanding. I reported my experience to the park rangers, who dismissed it as stress and overactive imagination. But I know what I saw and I know how I felt. There is something strange in Yosemite National Park. Something that watches. Something that waits. The missing people, the unexplained disappearances, they're not just accidents. There's a presence in those woods. Something ancient and evil. So if you ever find yourself in Yosemite, be very wary of the shadows. They're not just the absence of light. There's something more that might swallow you whole. The Duende Living on My Street by Driver Appropriate 965. So this happened back in 2004 when my family and I moved from California to Mexico for personal reasons. We stayed in a house my parents have in the town that they're from. I lived in Mexico from 2004 to 2007 and experienced some paranormal things. This is one of those things. By this time, I had already been living in Mexico for a couple of months. I had just gotten close to my cousins and had started having sleepovers. When it was their turn to come over to my house, we used to sleep in the living room next to the stairs that went to the second floor, which was on hold while my dad saved enough money to renovate it. They had a long plastic skylight covering the top of the stairs, and right under it was where we used to set up the blankets to sleep. By this point, one of my cousins had already slept over a couple of times, and one morning he asked me if we ever heard weird noises on the ceiling. I saw him asking me in a serious manner, so I asked him what he meant, and he was like, "Yeah, you guys don't hear like that tapping on the roof?" And I told him, "Oh, that's probably just birds tapping, you can see them during the day and stuff." They had the habit of landing on the skylight, so I did see birds up there from time to time, and we used to see their feet during the daytime. But that's when he said, No, I've seen the birds, but this is a different kind of tapping." So I again asked him what he meant. He once again told me, "Don't get scared, but I hear tiny shoes like if someone is running. It sounds exactly like walking thumps but smaller and lighter." I saw him straight in the face and couldn't hold it. I tried to scare him and yelled, "Ah!" and he busted out laughing. But I was like, no way, man. He's got to be making this up. We've been here for a while now, and we would have noticed anything like that. I was sure of it. I honestly believe in that type of stuff, but there's no way it's happening in my house, right? He had the idea to go up to the roof and see if we could spot anything since it was only at night when we heard those thumps. I agreed and we went to get a ladder and get up onto the roof. There was some dirt on the roof because the streets around us were dirt roads, and thanks to that, dirt got up there. I kid you not, we saw several small footsteps next to the skylight. I was excited, but also mortified at the same time. So I asked him if he was just messing with me. My cousin said, "How? If we've been inside the house the entire time, how could I be up here doing footprints?" And that honestly blew my mind. I put my hand next to the footprints, which were smaller than my pinky. It was about an inch long, maybe about half an inch wide, and it seemed like whatever it was doing circles around the skylight. I saw the footprints go up to the skylight and then walking away from it. But we could only follow the footprints on my roof because there wasn't sand everywhere, so we didn't know where it took off after it got off the roof. I just thought of this thing returning, and I just thought about how I was going to tell my mom, and when I did, she, of course, didn't believe us. I told her to go up there, look at the footprints for herself, but she said that she wasn't going to do that and was getting frustrated. We had a camera, but my parents always hid it from me, so I didn't run the chance of breaking it. I didn't have a phone with me or anything like that at the time. This was several years ago. I wanted to do something to set up some sort of surveillance to try to catch it on video, but I never really had the chance, and we moved back to the United States before I had the chance to. Honestly, eventually, my parents finished up the second floor, and we no longer heard those footsteps. It seemed like it just went away entirely. I did eventually run across stories of something called the Duende, and I do believe, after hearing all these things, that I may have experienced something like a Duende. Let me start by saying that my mom is super rational and level-headed. She is a cool head in any emergency and rarely freaks out or loses her composure. She's not the type to make up stories or lie, so I believed it was true when she told me about this encounter. My mother is in her 70s now, and this story takes place when she was in her 20s, so 50 some odd years back. My mom was still living at home after finishing college because she was still looking for a job. My grandparents were traveling around the country together at that point, and they were not home when this incident occurred. Her family had lived in this house since she was 12, so she had been there for a long time and never really saw anything weird until now. One night she woke up from a dead sleep for no apparent reason in the middle of the night. Off to her left, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a soft white glow. My mom turned her head and saw the figure of a woman float from the wall and begin to cross the room slowly. So, she said that this had to be a ghost or whatever, because there was no way that this was a human being moving at this rate and being so, glowy. She said that this thing, whatever it was wearing a long white gown like the ones people wore back to sleep in the olden days. The ghost stopped in the middle of the room, turned to look at her, but it never spoke a word. After a couple of seconds, it continued to cross the room, passing through the opposite wall, and vanished out of sight. The whole encounter was maybe 2-3 minutes at most. The next day, my mom called my grandpa and told him what happened. but he didn't believe her and thought she was just dreaming. A few days after this incident, she found an apartment and moved out because it scared her that badly. This story takes place on a lake in central New Hampshire, just a few miles north of the base of Mount Kearsarge. My friend has a cabin there, and his grandfather built it shortly after returning from the Second World War, and one warm summer night between my junior and senior years of high school, he and I were there, just hanging out. While we did drink and partake in the ganja from time to time, we were not intoxicated in any way on this night. We had simply been bored in our little hometown about 30 miles or approximately 48 kilometers to the south. So on a whim one evening, we decided to drive up and spend the night there, to light a fire and sit by the water on the beach chairs, and enjoy the nighttime t-shirt and swimming trunks weather while it lasted. I would say it was around 9 or 10 p.m., and we had gotten up to inspect his grandfather's old canoe that laid upside down atop the wooden dock because we wanted to use it the next day to head to the lone island to look for loon nests and try to catch some catfish. As we walked to the dock from where we had been sitting, I gazed across the lake at Mount Kearsarge. The mountain has a height of 2,937 feet, or 895 meters, and a prominence of 2,080 feet, or 630 meters. So, since it was basically 2,000 feet straight up from our position, as we were only a couple of miles from its summit, it was quite an imposing figure in the night sky. Now the mountain has a tower on the peak that flashes a red light at night. There is only one light, and it is red. I had seen it many times before. It was just a fact, however, as I followed my friend to the dock that I noticed there were more than 2 lights on this night. In addition to the usual red flashing light, there was a second, yellowish-orange orb to its right, essentially equidistant in height. It was not moving, flashing, pulsating, nothing. It just hung there, motionless in the night sky. I told my friend, who was immediately interested, and so we were both just stood there, transfixed for a while before he asked me what the hell I thought it was. I would have immediately considered a helicopter, but it was just so still and silent. After just a few moments of silent staring, we both shrugged our shoulders and continued down to the canoe at the end of the dock. We inspected it for a while, placing it in the lake to check for leaks, and decided that it was good to go, which was exciting, as we were really looking forward to getting on the water. After lugging it back to the original resting position, I turned to my right and bent down to wash the cobwebs off my fingers in the lake. As I was doing this, I returned my gaze to the mountain, and to my amazement, there were now 2 identical orbs, one on either side of the red flashing light. I smacked my friend across the shoulder and told him to look up, and again, we just stared transfixed, albeit this time a little more anxiety-ridden. "What the hell?" my friend said, with a bit of fear creeping into his voice. Without averting our gaze, we backpedaled to our chairs and began discussing possibilities. It is important to note that both of us were science-believing realists, and still are to this day. We both accepted the distinct possibility that we, humanity, were most likely not alone in this never-ending galaxy, let alone the universe. Something, all the grains of sand on Earth. You know, the old Carl Sagan adage. So as we sat, discussing both the Fermi paradox and the likelihood that it was just some sort of temporary, human-made thing going on top of the mountain, something happened. Before our eyes, one of the orbs slowly descended below the backside of the mountain and out of sight. I'm sorry, I know I am no aeronautical engineer or anything, but I know what a helicopter looks like when it descends in elevation. This was not like that at all. It sunk down and out of sight in less than just a few seconds, very smoothly, all without making any lateral movement whatsoever. We were stunned, but before we had time to wallow in this feeling or think that we could have possibly seen something unnatural, the other orb took off from its position. It did not gain or lose any elevation. It just took off horizontally at breakneck speed and began to make its way around the edge of the lake. It was not until the light was about halfway between its starting point and our position that we began to consider that it might be heading straight for us. We stood still at the shore and followed the objects with our eyes. Out of sheer curiosity, and without speaking, we both made an unconscious decision to wait and see what would happen. I mean, what else were we supposed to do? At no point did we talk or look at each other. We just stood there, watching. Without leaving you in suspense for too long, the object did eventually arrive to where we were, and upon its arrival, it slowed to a crawl and crept over us at a snail's pace. It was big. Not stereotypically mothership big, but big. I do not know exactly, but if I had to estimate, I would say it was about 50 meters in length by 30 meters in width. It was shaped like a fat cigar and had 2 or 3 rows of orange lights on its bottom. I cannot tell you what my friend was doing or how he was reacting at this time, for I was entranced. I remember thinking that I had never had an opportunity to view something like this, and I probably would never get another chance again. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, so I stared intensely, examining anything and everything about it that I could. Unfortunately, there were not many details that I could make out, only its approximate dimensions and the rows of lights. It made no real sounds aside from what I perceived to be a very, very faint humming. There were no beams of light shooting down at us or anything like that. We stood in the pitch blackness of the late New Hampshire night, and I remember preparing myself for something to happen to us. But as far as I know, nothing ever did. As soon as it had crept its way past us, it took off as fast as it had appeared, up into the night sky and out of sight. At that point, I shot my head back across the lake towards the mountain. There was nothing but the normal, flashing red light remaining. All appeared to be back to normal. I do not think we said anything to each other aside from, "Let's get out of here," or something to that effect, before grabbing what little we had brought with us and hightailing it back to my friend's car. We drove the 30 miles back to our hometown, purchased some snacks at the convenience store, and returned to his house, where we proceeded to set up the same beach chairs that we had brought with us to the lake in his backyard, where we stayed up for most of the night, talking about what the hell we had just seen. For the next few weeks, my mind had hardly focused on anything else. I told my parents at some point, but they sort of just laughed it off, telling me that it must have been a helicopter or something like that. And after their reaction, I decided not to tell anyone else. Not until I was older and gave no crap about what people would think of me. It was only then that I began to tell my trusted friends about what happened that night. My friend and I have since parted ways. We live across an ocean from each other now and talk from time to time. In fact, it has been a few years since one of us brought it up. However, sitting here and writing this down, it just now made me want to reach out and talk with him again. I know what I saw, and it was not constructed by humanity. We do not have that sort of technology, at least, not that we know of. And if we do, there is far more hidden from the average citizen of the Earth than I thought possible. But I am digressing into conspiracy theories now, and that is a path that I try not to go down. The fact is that the possibility that we are alone in the universe is so microscopically small. Consider this. There are billions of planets out there that are much, much older than Earth. All it would take is one of them to have developed intelligent life a few million years before us, giving them a massive head start in the development and technology scheme that would allow them to create machines that could do what these objects are. Thank you for sharing my story, Swamp Dweller. I hope you enjoyed it. It was about late November in Colorado, and I was about 7 or 8 years old. My father had the great idea of taking us all for a weekend to a cabin that he was going to rent. My mother thought it was a great idea for me, my sister, my father, and my mother to bond. So that's exactly what happened. We rented a cabin for a few days. We took off school on Friday to get a head start on getting there, which I had no issue with. We got there and it was sure cold. Well, it was almost December, so I guess it made sense that it was so cold. Anyway, we got all set up and decided where we would all sleep. We ate dinner, and then we all got set up for bed, and were thinking about what we would do tomorrow. We got there kind of late, so we couldn't do too much on the first day. That night, though, I heard noises outside. It sounded kind of like footsteps. I looked out the window and saw nothing of note, so I figured it must have been an animal or something. I tried my very best to go back to sleep, and somewhere around 15 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, though, I made sure to wake my sister up. She was about 11 at the time, and she heard it as well. We both walked over to the window and saw something out there. We weren't quite sure what it was. We decided it was best for it not to see us, so we went back to sleep. I had a hard time sleeping that night, and so did my sister. But when we eventually woke up, my mother was inside making breakfast, and my father was outside. I asked my mom if I could go outside with my dad, and she told me sure, while my sister stayed inside and waited for her breakfast. I walked outside and my father was talking to some man, a short, chubby man. He had a shaved head and was wearing a veteran cap. He looked really nervous too for some reason. He was sweating a lot, even though it was freezing outside. I walked over to him and my father looked at me and said, "Oh, this is my son," and told him my name. The man looked at me and said, "Nice to meet you, kid. My name's Patrick." He smiled and looked at me. I smiled and greeted him back. It may have been rude at the time, but I was just a kid. And I asked him, "You look kind of scared. Are you alright?" He kind of coughed and replied, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just went through shell shock. I'm a veteran," he said, as I couldn't tell already with the cap he was wearing. He seemed rather normal at the time. My father seemed to really like this guy, and I liked him at first too. He told my father he had also rented a cabin with his family, and that they were really close to us, and he decided to introduce himself. My father invited him inside for breakfast and he stayed, and it was seemingly normal. I went outside to play after that with my father and Patrick. While outside, I fell and scraped my knee and started crying. My father was inside at the time, a bad time for him to be inside. My mother was calling for him, and he ran inside while I was out there with Patrick. Patrick ran over to me and told me to come to his cabin, because he had band-aids. I agreed and went with him. I wasn't a very smart kid. I went with Patrick. We talked about what I liked doing, and I told him about video games that I played and stuff like that. Then, things got weird. He asked me what shoe size I was and how old I am. I didn't know what my shoe size was. I told him, but I told him my age. He just kind of chuckled and said something along the lines of, "Good to know." Also, his cabin was nowhere near ours. It was way back. It took about 20 to 25 minutes to walk there. I was tired and there was no point in getting a Band-Aid anymore, but I still decided to keep going since I had walked so long. We entered the cabin and he told me to go in first, so I did. As soon as I walked in, I realized something. There was nobody in there. No family. I asked him where his family was and he didn't answer, pretending like he didn't hear. He locked the door. I then kind of got frightened. He told me, "I'll be right back with a Band-Aid, kiddo." He walked into the kitchen and pulled one out of somewhere, and then walked back and told me to have a seat and he'd put it on. I sat down and he put it on me. He also held my leg in his other hand and rubbed it down and told me, "You're rather muscular, kid. I like that." I got kind of scared and immediately stood up. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him nothing, and that my leg was feeling much better. I then thought my parents must be worried sick, and I should hurry back. He insisted that I stay longer and ate there. I didn't want to, but I was alone, and if I ran, I don't think I could have found my way back to the cabin. The door was locked too, so I just agreed and decided to eat with him and get it over with fast. He asked how much I weighed, and I guessed around 73 pounds. He then had a smile across his face. He nodded and said, "Perfect weight." I asked him why it was perfect weight. He just kept smiling. I was really weirded out and asked him if I could go. He said no, and that things were just getting started, and I shouldn't miss out on the fun. He had such a weird tone when he said that. I then heard a big bang come from the bedroom. It was a closed door. Patrick stood up and looked kind of angry. He walked into the room and shut the door behind him. I then heard him yelling, "Did I freaking tell you that you could move? No, so stay the hell where you are. I have company." Or something like that. He then walked out with a smile on his face and shut the door slowly. Sorry about that. It was just my wife. She was really sick and not allowed to be near visitors today. He was smiling while saying that. I wanted to go. I then looked around the room and noticed there were clothes everywhere, and it was really messy. He must have been living out of here. At that moment, his wife walked out of the room. "I'm hungry," she said. He looked pissed. "Get back in there," he said. His wife was extremely pale and looked like she had been crying a lot. She was sniffling and had red circles around her eyes. She looked at me,
then walked back in the room. I asked him where his kids were. He didn't answer. He told me he had kids' clothes that he wanted me to try on. That was the last straw. I had to get out of this situation, but I didn't know how to. I started crying and then he hugged me. He told me, "It'll be okay, little one. Nothing is going to happen. Just try on these clothes." He walked in the back room. I thought that was the perfect time for me to leave. I unlocked his door and tried to leave as quietly as I could. I didn't care if I got lost anymore. I didn't want to take the chances with Patrick, if that was even his name. I had a feeling that he had been lying. He lied about having kids, who knows what else. I was in the woods trying to find my way back. I was still close to his house, close enough to hear shouting. I heard him yelling stuff to his wife. Things along the lines of, "Where the F did I go?" and "I knew I shouldn't have left him alone." Stuff like that. I could have sworn I heard him call her a bunch of names that I don't want to repeat. Then, it happened. I stopped in my tracks. I heard footsteps. I went and hid behind a tree and looked in his direction. He was outside and he seemed to be looking for me. I was far enough away to where I could barely see him, but I could tell he was looking for something. He then stepped out into the forest and I heard him shouting, "Hey kid, it's okay, you can come back now. You don't have to try on the clothes. I have toys in the back of my cabin. If you want to come play with them, just come back." I then ran. I ran as fast as I could in a straight line in hopes I would find my family. I was running away and I thought I heard shouting, but I didn't stop to hear it. Then, after about an hour of running, I saw a cabin. My cabin. I ran to it. My father was outside looking around for me. I ran up to him crying and told him Patrick wasn't a good guy, and that he really was weird, and he was touching my legs and stuff. My father immediately called the person he rented the cabin from, and he said that nobody had rented that cabin. My father looked at me and told me to never follow any stranger ever again. We immediately left that day and asked for a refund for the next day. The guy renting them out apologized. The man, having the cabin rentals, called the police, and the police went back there and checked the cabin, and there was nobody there, not even his wife. His clothes and belongings were still there, is what they told us. Nothing really happened after that. They asked questions and left. They never called us or told us anything about him ever again. Patrick most likely wasn't his real name, and he probably wasn't a veteran. I just want to know what happened to him and his wife, and how he even got a wife in the first place, and how and why he lived in that cabin. He seemed to have been living there for a while. I guess he left because he figured the police would be coming after him because he didn't rent the cabin. So many questions that will likely never get answered. I'm just glad that it's all over. Hi, Swamp Dweller. I do not know if you would be interested in a story from England. It is kind of long-winded and not overly scary, but it's a pretty weird experience that me and my partner would never forget. To set the scene, we live in a busy city in the South Midlands of England. We have a bully breed dog and take him out for walks in surrounding parks and woods quite often. I am quite into the paranormal and have experienced lots of things. My mom is a spiritual medium, so I guess it comes with the territory. My partner, however, is a science graduate and is a very everything has an explanation sort of person. Anyway, on this day we decided to go to a popular picnic park just on the outskirts of the city. It is almost always full of families, dog walkers and picnickers. It was late spring and the temperature was just starting to hit summer heat. It was a sunny day, not a cloud in the sky and no wind. The park was full of the usual parents and kids and their family dogs, old couples going for walks and the like. Here in England, bully breeds are still quite stigmatized and feared, so we really avoid going where there are a lot of people. Not that our dog is dangerous or anything, he is just overly friendly and people freak out when he trots up to greet them. So we decided to go a bit off the beaten track. To give you a rough idea, the park has a small lake in the center, with paths and benches that surround it. Just off one of these paths are a few farmers' fields in a thick wooded area which snakes around into another path which eventually leads back to the park. We decided to go through the cattle gate which leads through the farmers' fields. It was so hot and beautiful that day that nothing spooky or creepy even crossed our minds. Even though you could no longer see anyone, you could still hear kids playing and dogs barking. As we came up to the wooded area, whilst on the dirt path alongside it, I noticed a man walking through the thick brush. I thought this was weird because he was coming from the opposite end of the woods, which literally leads to nothing. No houses or roads or anything. Just endless fields and woods as far as I know. I just told myself he must be looking for his dog or something. My partner noticed him too, and we shared a look at each other, like, what a weirdo, and carried on walking. But I could not help but look at him. He looked so strange. It must have been close to 30 degrees, and he was in a thick black hoodie, black trousers or sweats. He had longish, dirty blonde hair, and maybe was around our age, maybe mid-20s. But the weirdest fact is he had a dazed sort of smile on his face, and his head kind of tilted to one sidewinder. When he walked, he swayed from side to side slightly. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, and was telling myself that he was just a stoner or something looking for his dog. He was not calling or making noises to get a dog's attention, though, or anything which was even stranger. Anyway, I kept looking back over my shoulder every couple of minutes. He was in the brush for a little while, but then joined the path we were on and began walking our way. He must have been about 30 feet behind us. I noticed how tall he was, because now that we were on the path, I could pretty much size him up. He must have been about 6'9", maybe even 7 feet. He was huge, maybe like 17 or 18 stone, 240 to 250 pounds more or less. Around this point, we noticed everything went silent. There were no kids laughing, no indistinctive family chatter, no dogs barking, no birds tweeting, nothing. The only sound was the sound of our footsteps and wind, but there was no wind. It was roasting hot, not even a slight breeze yet. We could hear the wind blowing through the trees. Even though the sun was beating down, it felt darker somehow, like everything was, I don't know, desaturated. My partner started to freak out, and strangely, so did our dog. Now this really struck me as weird. Our boy is the kind of dog who would greet anyone, or run up to them to play. But no, he would not even look back at me or the man. My partner and dog started to speed up to get away from the wooded area and this weird behemoth of a man. I really started to freak out myself, but did not want to upset my partner even further, so I kept my cool, quiet, and kept my pace. I looked over my shoulder again, and he was closer, maybe 25 feet away at this point. Now for a bit of context, as you exit the wooded area, you come to a path which is surrounded on either side with tall, thick bushes, and it curves around widely to lead you back to the main park. The curve is so wide that you can see far ahead, but you can only see the bushes where it curves, sort of thing. Neither of the exits are in view. As we reach this path, I check again, and the guy is even closer now. It is still silent. All I can hear is the faint wind sounds in our footsteps, but nothing from the man. He is still smiling in that dazed sort of way, and still kind of swaying. Everything still felt weird and dull. It's the only way I can describe it. And I thought to myself, if this weird bloke is going to try something, I'm going to have to protect my partner. I'm only 5'8" myself, and not much of a fighter, so I grabbed my car and house keys and put them between my fingers in my pocket. If this dude wanted to try anything, I'd smash him in the face and leg it. I'm not fast either, but I convinced myself I'd be faster than him. Just for a little bit of a reference though, don't put your keys in between your knuckles, you're just gonna break your hand. I check over my shoulder again, and he is even closer still. I start to hype myself up. He was coming, and I was ready. I realized I could not hear him at that moment though. He was probably about 15 feet behind me now. My partner and dog had literally hightailed it up the path, but why couldn't I hear the footsteps from them? Another quick glance, and he was right behind me, not even 5 feet away now. This was it. If I was going to do anything, it had to be now. If I could keep the element of surprise on my side, I might stand a chance and give us the opportunity to run. I swung around as quickly as I could and went to shout at him and swipe, but he was gone. There was nothing there, no man and no sign of him whatsoever. I paused and looked around. He could not have run back along the path. He could not be that quick. I would still be able to see him as the path winds around so widely he would still be in view. He could not have jumped through either side of the path into one of the rows of bushes, as I would have heard it and seen the rustling of the bushes or something like that. He had just vanished. I stayed there for a moment, and only when I decided to walk on to check on if my other half and my dog were okay, I realized I could hear the park again. The wind's noises had gone, and the day returned to normal. The sunlight was no longer dull, and everything seemed normal. I got shivers and ran to catch up. I asked my partner if they had seen him go anywhere, but they did not see anything. They just said he really freaked them out and they did not want to be there anymore. I could see that they were really shaken. The dog was back to normal though, wagging his tail and wanting to play and explore. We decided to cut our walk short and drive home. Shortly after we got home, I rang my mom and told her about it. She advised me to check reports for missing people or deaths related to the area, which I did, and weirdly, lots of people have died there by suicide or overdose. But none of the people I found online matched this person's description. I tried to forget about it and get back to normal life and all that. I was applying to go back to college at the time, so I did not really need to be thinking about giant ghost men. After a few days, it had left our minds and we got back to some sort of normality. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night and opened my eyes. As they adjust to the darkness, I look up at the ceiling where this orange glow of the street lamp shines through our window, and my heart stops. He was there, stood over our bed. He was so tall that his head was right below our ceiling light, and he still had that weird, dazed smile all lit up in the orange glow. I jump up and punch as hard as I can, but my fist does not meet anything, because there was nothing there. I turn on the light and look around. Nothing. I have never seen him since, but after seeing him in our bedroom, our apartment, felt horrid afterwards. I never felt homey or safe, and we would hear horrible things. For example, at one point in the middle of the night, I heard my own voice call my partner's name from the other side of our bedroom door. We heard walking in our attic, which was too low for people to walk in, and our pets would not sleep alone. We left that flat after a year or so of dealing with that weird ghostly experience. My partner, of course, kept denying that it was ghostly, just that it could not be explained. There were other reasons for us leaving, like we wanted to expand and get ourselves a house and garden, but my main reason for leaving that area was because of that man. I have not seen him since, and I hope I never do again. We have now been in our new house for about a year and have not experienced anything strange. A few things have happened, but nothing scary or completely unexplainable. It has been about 2 years or so since this happened, and we both still refuse to go to that park. Daylight or not, I do have a few more freaky stories, so if you're interested, please let me know. Thanks for taking the time to read about our experience, and if anyone in England has witnessed something similar, I would love to know in the comments down below.
The Tall Figure on the Trail by Jay the Guy. My neighbor M and I walked to the store and returned to our apartment complex when it was completely dark outside. It was chilly in early December, around 9:30 to 10 p.m. To get to the apartments we lived, we had to go through a stretch of road that was covered by trees and had no streetlights. Usually we can see this using the moonlight that shines through the spaces in the leaves. It had been cloudy since December, so there was very little moonlight. A small entrance to the trails leading up to the cemetery behind the apartments we lived, and we smelled something like decaying animal or something while we were walking. Honestly, we both assumed it was just a deer or something that had died, which is pretty common around the area, honestly, especially the flats where there's tons of roadkill all the time. However, M decided to point the flashlight at the entrance of the trails. We both noticed and pointed out a very tall figure crouching down. I'm 5'9", and it would have been at least eye level with me crouched. It was skinny, a pale gray in color, with long, dangling limbs, and either sunken eyes in or none at all. All I was seeing was 2 black sockets. I describe it as it looks like someone took decaying skin and stretched it all across the skeleton. We both ran until we got to M's apartment. We still don't know what we saw that night. We've tried to figure it out. We're still waiting to get answers. It's common for creepy stuff to happen at the apartments. A lot of people believe it's haunted and that cemetery belongs to something much more evil in those woods, but I'm not really too sure. This is the first time I've ever really seen anything of this level. My Scary Smith Hall's Story by Lancashire Lass. This is the first time I've told anyone this story. It happened when I was just 10 years old. My Nana would take me to visit museums, halls, and places of interest during school holidays to keep me out of trouble. One of the places she took me was Smith Hills Hall, which is in Bolton. It's rumored that several spirits haunt this place. One of them is often seen sitting on the front bench of the indoor chapel with his head down in prayer. Many people have claimed to have seen him and have described a water puddle next to the bench, where he places his umbrella while praying. I said earlier that my Nana took me to go visit these places to keep me out of trouble, but on this occasion, I wandered off from the tour group and up a flight of winding stairs. I walked to the end of the corridor and found myself on the chapel balcony, overlooking the stalls beneath. No one was allowed to be in there due to health and safety rules, but back then, it was a very common place for people to be. I didn't see the praying gentleman and was quite glad because I could hear the tour guide's voice trailing off in the distance. It was pretty lonely on the upper floor, and I knew my Nana would be frantic, so I rejoined the group. As I got back to the stairs, I saw a creaky old wooden door to the right of me with a big metal handle. So, curiosity killed the cat. I turned and went inside. The floorboards were uneven and rickety. There was a table, chairs, and a big wardrobe that was ancient. I opened the wardrobe, and inside were robes that the chapel choir boys had changed into on their church service days. I shut the door and turned to leave. In the corner, at the table, was a man who I immediately thought looked like William Shakespeare. We were currently studying Shakespeare back at that time in school. He had a tunic, leggings, a rough-looking collar, and a pipe with a long handle. At first, I thought it was a dummy that I had missed at first glance, but I was going to get a closer look. And as I got closer, I stopped in my tracks because it slightly turned its head, and I swear, it side-eyed me. I got freaked out. I ran for the door and screeched out loud as I flung the door open. My Nana came up the stairs furious that I had sloped off and got lost. She asked what I was doing, screaming the place down, as she put it. I told her about the man, and she went into the room to look for herself. And of course, as luck would have it, no one was there, and I got a good telling off. We rejoined the tour as they gathered around the bottom of the stairs to see a footprint, years and years old, embedded in the stone floor. It was supposed to have been done by a martyr named George Marsh, who was arrested for his religious beliefs in the area and subsequently killed. I just looked at my Nana, who was furious, and asked if George Marsh was in the room upstairs. And of course, I got told off again. I'll never forget making eye contact with the man in the funny clothes. He seemed confused, looking at me like he was seeing something he had never seen before. I've been back to that place since. I've even gone up the stairs. They have since been roped off, apparently, but I've never seen anything close to this. Something Large Was Stalking Us by John Smith 9373. This story takes place in northern New Hampshire. I am writing on my girlfriend's behalf as this happened to her, but she's told me this story on numerous occasions. I love your YouTube channel, Swamp Dweller, so I feel it's finally time that I share this brief but deeply mystifying story with the swamp folk. Back in the year of 2013, my girlfriend was a camp counselor at a camp on a lake in New Hampshire. She was staying the night alone in a cabin-type building next to the road, which is also surrounded by woods and forest for miles. As sometime during the night, while doing something on her iPad, she heard a strange knocking noise coming from just outside the cabin. Scared, she thought it could be an animal at first, but then it sounded like footsteps were going in circles around the cabin, and it definitely sounded like it was bipedal.
So she began to get a little freaked out because obviously she's out in the middle of nowhere, trying to just relax, but now it sounds like there might be some strange unknown person stalking her. She hid in her small bunk until the wee hours of the morning. The whole time, these footsteps circling the cabin and never really stopping. As this strange noise kept knocking on the outside of the house as well, it was like she was being stalked by some animal, creature, or person. Who knows what was going on out there? Eventually, after hours of terror and feeling like she was surrounded by some sort of nefarious presence, she called the police. They eventually came out and they searched the area around the cabin, the dark woods, and all that stuff, but they never really found anything. I'm not even sure if they found footprints. They didn't really seem like they took it that serious. She didn't know what this thing was, but it rattled her to her core. It may have been some kind of cryptid like a Wendigo or some sort of person trying to get in and harm her, or maybe it was just an animal. Who knows? But I'm just glad she made it out alive and is okay and thriving with me today. Thanks, Swamp Dweller, if you decide to share this story. I swear it's true, and my girlfriend has been pretty terrified ever since. The Deer Witch by Anonymous. Hello, my name is Chase. I have a story from the Perry State Forest and my home that neither I nor my friends will ever forget. But before that, I do need to share a little bit of backstory. We live on a large hill bordering the Perry State Forest. My entire immediate family lived on this hill. My grandfather, aunt, uncle, cousins, my mother, father, and myself. My aunt and uncle had a medium-sized farm and raised many goats as well as free-roaming chickens. It was common for the animals to go missing. We initially thought it was due to the presence of coyotes until we captured a mountain lion on one of our trail cameras. It's worth noting that we live in southern Ohio, where mountain lions are not even supposed to be found. Yet there it was with its den in our wild woods. Strange occurrences often happen at night, such as seeing shadows, hearing loud knocks, whispers, screams, footsteps, and even hearing drums in the woods every year around Halloween. Pretty creepy. But moving forward, let's get into the meat of this story. The first encounter I remember was when I was maybe 8 years old and fell asleep late one night in my living room. We had a massive window with a TV to the left of it, in the corner of the room. I woke up and looked at the clock. It was somewhere around 3 a.m., and the TV was buzzing static. I looked out the window from the couch, and there it was. A tall man, wearing a brown cloak likely made of deer skins, and a deer head covering his face. He's standing there, very close to the window, with a little Indian girl in braids to his right. He stood there and stared at me for a long time, then waved to me in a way that said, "Come outside." After I freaked out and just sat there in shock, they both walked out of view and away from the window. I had a sudden urge to follow them, but I stayed put and cried out of fright. I then ran to my room and eventually fell asleep. The following day, I explained what had happened to me earlier that night to my mother, and she told me it was probably a friendly Indian chief who was just paying a visit, meaning no harm. I had since blocked the experience from my memory and forgot that it even happened until many years later when my mom sat me down and told me the actual, truth. The chief has been around for a long time and has terrorized everyone on the hill, staring at them from afar since they moved in at around 1999. She told me, according to her knowledge, that he was from the Adena tribe. During his time, he would collect kids from the surrounding tribes and take them away for human sacrifices. She further explained that he wasn't waving me hello. He was waving me to follow him outside with the Indian girl, to do God knows what with me once I was alone in the woods. She said, "He is evil." My mother doesn't use that word very often, but she said, "Whatever that thing is, it's pure evil. And don't ever go out in the woods alone at night. Don't ever go with friends. Stay as far away from the deep woods, because an evil lives there." And so, of course, I didn't listen. My friends and I quickly learned our lesson. My two friends
Andy and Jeremy and I decided to have some spooky fun after a long and tedious night. We were all 17 to 18 years old, so we hatched the plan to go into the woods, and the Perry State Forest was the perfect location. We wanted to try to scare ourselves and just mess around and have some fun. After all, roads in the forest were only a couple of miles long. For example, in a 20-minute drive, you could easily make it right into the city. It was a straight shot, one single road with no turns. We decided to drive because walking out there was just a little too ballsy for our taste. In all honesty, we just loved the rush of being spooked. Adam and Jeremy are, or at the very least were, the furthest thing from superstitious, but they didn't believe in anything unless they could see it for themselves. And that's precisely what they got. We were in my father's car, which was a manual BMW. It was a fast car and we felt so cool driving it around. The time was approaching 2:30 a.m. when we slowly went into the forest after turning off the main road. Upon entering the forest, a wave of something comes crashing over us. It felt as if we were phasing through a wall that wasn't actually there. The air just felt heavy and thick, and we felt extreme pressure on our chest. It even made our eyes tear up, and it was hard to breathe. There was no pain, just an overwhelming feeling of sadness, anger, guilt, dread, regret, and emotional distress. It felt like every bad feeling you could feel all together at once. We felt like we needed to turn around and just say forget it, but we wanted this. We wanted to feel scared. It's what we came for in the first place, is it not? So we continued driving through the weird wall of bad feelings, and we all just thought we got that weird feeling because we were in the woods at night, and it was late and dark out. It was dark out. It was a new moon, so we didn't have any light at all. It made sense at the time, yet the headlights could only see a couple of yards in front of us, which was definitely not typical for the LED lights my dad had installed. We talked about how weird the feeling was when we entered the forest. Then, out of nowhere, we saw a prominent black figure standing on the left side of the road. It just watched us drive by, and then it was gone by the time we passed it. And when I say black, it was just black. It was darker than anything I've ever seen. The darkness of the forest behind it almost looked bright in comparison. We checked the rear view mirrors and it had just vanished. Poof, it was gone. It was like it was never there in the first place. We said some obscenities to each other, wholly stunned at what we had just witnessed. We drove for about a whole minute or so in silence until Andy said,
Did y'all see that shit?
We all agreed with the simple, uh-huh. We continued to drive. After a while, Andy looked up at the sky and says,
Guys, the sky kind of looks off.
Me and my other friend looked up, and the sky wasn't just off, it was literally blood red. Yet it was so dark in the forest that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We thought maybe it was starting to get daylight out, but it was only 2:32 a.m. We were perplexed at how little time had passed since we had entered, and how the sky could be lit up such dark red on Earth. At first, we thought it could be a blood moon, yet there was no moon to be seen. We continued our journey for half an hour in a straight line. Then suddenly Andy yelled and said, Nah, dog, I swear we just passed that tree. I just saw that tree, I know I did. I denied it with a simple, nah, dog, like you're tripping, you know? Eventually, after some arguing, we continued to start passing the same trees, the same guardrail, the same lake, the same signs. It honestly felt like we were seeing the same things over and over and over again. Everything kept repeating, as if we were driving in one big circle. But that was impossible since the road was only a straight line. We couldn't have taken any wrong turns because we never made a turn. So we were kind of freaked out and not knowing what to do.
Dang man, this feels like some Blair Witch stuff,
Jeremy murmured, as we continued to drive through the endless loop that we were now apparently stuck in. After about 15 minutes of relative peace, other than the screams, human figures, and other horrific things happening all around us, the radio randomly switched on. We heard people talking on the radio through the static, but they weren't just like radio hosts. It was actual people. So many people were talking at once, it was deafening. We heard loud knocking and banging on the doors and windows, enough to shake the car. The voices in our heads were now screaming at us to stop driving, roll down the windows, and get out of the car, and do anything to let them in. Everything was deafening. It was so insanely loud that we all started weeping. We just gave up. We couldn't handle it anymore. Then, in the blink of an eye, we appeared on the new reservoir road before the city. We all looked at each other, utterly stunned and bewildered at how we had just teleported at the end of a dirt road of a forest to the city. The radio was still blaring static, so we reached and turned it down so we could talk amongst ourselves. I looked and saw that the time was now 3 a.m. How did such little time pass? How did we get here? We had no clue, and we still don't. We were just glad it was over. We drove back to the city. The sky slowly faded from red to black. We stopped at a 24-hour Taco Bell and got some food, sitting in the parking lot and talking about what we had just experienced. Then, right before we were able to walk in and really enjoy ourselves, there was the figure we saw at the beginning of the drive, standing right on the edge of the property line, staring directly at us, but now we could see it in finite detail. It was about 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and the stature of an Akeem man. He was wearing a blacker-than-black cloak and a deer skull on his head with piercing red glowing eyes. It then raised its hand to its chest and waved a single wave from his chest to his hip, then vanished into the woods behind it. We went inside, and honestly, we were kind of scared to go back to our car for quite... It took a while, but we eventually got in the car and went home. I've never experienced anything remotely like this again, but I'll tell you one thing that me and my 2 friends learned. Never go into the woods at night. I was alone in my hot tub at around 11 p.m. behind my house. The woods surrounded my backyard, and there was no fence separating them. So when you are in the hot tub, you just face the woods about 100 feet away. I had the porch lights on, and I was just sitting on my phone when I heard a sound I had never heard before. It was a high-pitched, smooth, "hoo" sound. It was almost as if someone was singing the word "who," but with a very elongated, high-pitched "ooh" sound. It only lasted about 2 to 3 seconds, and I immediately froze and got goosebumps. I know you're not supposed to acknowledge stuff like that, so I called my brother and mom so they could come watch my back and help me get into the house. While I was on the phone, I heard it again. I didn't even want to get out of the hot tub. I have lived here my whole life and have never heard anything like it. I have listened to various noises, coyotes, deer, owls, etc., and I've been researching different kinds of animal noises, but none of it matches. I'm hoping somebody in the chat has experienced something similar. This next story is something that happened a couple of weeks later. So, I've been hearing this creepy bird-like whistle since probably around 18 or whatnot, a little bit different from this other noise I mentioned. For context, like I said, we live in the countryside, and there's a sugarcane field on the other side of my house from where the woods are, and behind that field are more woods. The field was so wide, it was a bit far from our house. I don't know when exactly I started hearing it, but as long as I can remember, I heard this strange sound. I believe it started at 18. I'm 20 now, so it's been at least 2 years. At first, I tried to pay it no mind, but I noticed that I've been hearing it, honestly, more and more. And now that I've moved out and I've been in my apartment for some time, just so I can, get through college and whatnot, I began to hear it here. I even moved apartments, so now I'm in my second apartment. It's also near the woods, and now I'm still hearing it. It's located at the end of the street, and at one time, I went out alone to buy some snacks because I was pulling an all-nighter for my project. That's when I heard this weird whistle again, but this time closer than ever. I didn't want to overthink too much before, and I told myself that it might just be a bird, but when I heard it that night, it creeped me out. I think I heard it last February this year, and I'm still hearing it every time I go to the countryside. Should I be concerned? Or am I just being paranoid because of all these weird noises? A few years ago while in college, I worked the opening shift at a coffee shop that was nestled next to a thick set of woods. In the summer, I would wake up early, sometimes stopping by a trail on my way to work for a quick walk to wake myself up as the sun rose. Most people have probably heard the shave and haircut, 2 bits, jingle knock before. The trail, it was only accessible from a narrow, long winding dirt road, which branched off the main road with no houses or anybody living there. The trail was poorly marked and not very well maintained, so not many people would ever stop by. If there was anyone else, you would either see their car parked in the small 3-car gravel lot at the trailhead, or would have to pass them on the narrow dirt road. Otherwise, you would have to walk a long way down a main highway road to get there. So, back to the shave and a haircut bit. I parked there one morning just kind of sitting in my car with the window down when I heard a bird singing what sounded like 2 bits, part of the song. Tired and trying to find humor in having to be up so early, I kind of laughed and whistled, "Shave and a haircut," and what came back was the exact same thing. It was like it was responding to me directly. We went back and forth with our little game a few more times until the bird stopped responding. So I figured it just flew off or something. Before I got out of my car, though, I gave it one last whistle. And I'm sure glad I did, because as soon as I whistled "shave and a haircut" and waited for a response, I heard 2 very loud human claps in the 2 bits rhythm, not far from where I was parked. I drove the hell out of there as fast as I could, and I didn't see anyone on the road for miles. That might not be the most terrifying story you've ever shared on this channel, but it weirds me out to think that someone might have just been out there in the woods watching me alone in my car. So last night I'm having some brews with my homie. It's around 10:30. We head down to my local park. Typically during the day, we'd go to this trail behind the park that is open to the public. After hanging, talking, and just normal vibes, we had to go use the bathroom. So we decided, let's go down the trail to the entrance where it's dark and enclosed so no one can see us. So we were walking, and as we were getting to the entrance area, we walked a little bit further into the trail, but still close enough to the entrance that we could see it. We felt a very typical vibe, laughing and continuing our drinking. I remember it being a little ominous when looking down a pitch-black path into a full trail completely surrounded by the forest. We didn't notice, but it was completely and utterly quiet, which was odd. Out of nowhere, my best friend and I heard this brushing noise like tree branches moving. We instantly looked down the path and exactly where it was coming from. It was as if some creature was darting towards us as fast as possible. I see the dirt from the trail being lifted into the air, and non-stop speeding steps coming toward us. I could hear everything, but it was hard to make out what it was. I was freaking out, thinking it might be either another person running towards us as fast as possible, or some kind of animal. I had no idea, but fight or flight kicked in, and my homie and I felt cornered and weirded out. It was non-stop running for us. In that instant, we turned around and we ran out of there as fast as possible. Now, maybe I'm just confused, but I'm from California, the Long Beach area. What animal rapidly randomly runs towards 2 humans like that? I couldn't tell you, especially that loudly on this little trail. I would think maybe it's a mountain lion, a bear, something like that, but I feel like I would have saw the outline of something that big. Whatever it was, it absolutely terrified me, and if we would have stayed there for at least 10 more seconds, I don't think we'd be here today sharing this story. For context, I'm a 17-year-old female, and I have lived in my house my entire life with my 2 other siblings and parents. My family and I live in this partly rural part of Fenton/Heartland, Michigan, and we've been here my whole life, like I said. We own 10 acres of land, which includes a pretty large track in our backyard that we ride 4-wheelers and such. The rest of it's untouched and just woods and trees. Every once in a great while, it seems that we hear some strange and very unnerving things when we go inside, though. A few years ago, my family took a walk out to look at our new neighbor's house, as they were gone for the weekend, and said we were welcome to check things out. On our way down our 1/4-mile gravel driveway, all of us heard what I can only describe as drums and chanting. It really freaked me and my brother out,
because it seemed to be a fair distance away, almost as if it had been coming from the woods in our backyard. There was a fair number of drumming sounds, and sometimes you would even hear chanting alongside it. It must have been pretty far away, but the sound still carried, which made it even creepier. I probably had this occur to me at least 2 or 3 times since we've lived here, and every time it's been unsettling and felt really wrong. We would be very aware if our town had any native tribes or reservations, but my small, conservative hometown would definitely not be the place to go to. I have searched high and low, but haven't been able to find anything on the internet in these areas that would even remotely explain what's going on, and it seems nobody else has the same experiences. If anybody listening to this has any idea what's going on, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to know. I'm awoken in the middle of the night to the sound of thumping and my dog Benjamin barking up a storm. Slowly getting up, I can hear my bones creaking. Age does that to anyone. Walking past a mirror, I stop to look at myself for a second and realize the years haven't been kind to me. Come on, Sawyer, I tell myself. Keep it moving. As I walk out into the living room of my cabin, I listen closely, Benjamin tailing close behind me. It's quiet now, save for the sound of the cold, snowy winds outside. I take a peek outside my window and see nothing, though I'll admit it's hard to see much out in this storm and at this time of night. After a few minutes, I decide to walk back towards my bedroom and lay down again. The warmth of the blankets is welcoming and comforting. Winters are cold out here in the forest and mountains of Washington. The warmth of the blankets makes an old soul like myself not want to get out. If you take me now, God, I'm quite sure I'd never know I died. That's the level of comfort we are speaking of here. Thump, thump, thump. Benjamin goes wild with his barking as I struggle to regain my bearings again. Looking around, I debate if I even want to get up this time. Quiet, boy, I tell Benjamin. It's probably just a storm anyhow. Get some rest. We got a long winter and not many places to be, my friend. It is with that, Benjamin and I drift off to sleep. Morning arises, and after much struggle, due to the aforementioned warmth of the blankets, I finally get up, get dressed, and decide to make some breakfast. Nothing quite like bacon, eggs, and hash browns to start the morning right. I'm pretty far out in the woods, but we do live close enough to a town that is only about an hour to an hour and a half away during the fall, and I stock up on plenty of food to go with meat I hunt as well. If there's one way I swear to never leave this earth, it's through starving. My gut is proof of that, I tell you what. I start up some coffee and decide to go out and survey how much snow has fallen since last night. According to the forecast, we were to have a slight lull during the day before snow impacts us hard again tonight. Looking around, I see I'll have to do some shoveling and clearing out around the cabin, but I figure I can do that after I get some food in me. I turn around and see Benjamin, who just finished his business, run up to me excitedly, tail wagging like the first day I pulled him from his mother, when he was just a wee little pup. Now, he's a huge Saint Bernard, and my most loyal and devoted friend. His mother passed a few years back, sadly, and the dog that impregnated her never really stuck around. I pet Benjamin, and as I do, I look over at the cabin. That's when I notice something odd. There appears to be some damage to my door. Walking over to examine the door more closely, it seems there are some broken and chipped pieces of wood, and a bit of indentation. That's strange. Could the storm have done this? I think on it for a moment, but decide ultimately I'll add reinforcing and repairing to my door to my to-do list, and for the day, move back inside with Benjamin to check on breakfast and the coffee that goes with it. Shutting the door behind us, I finish making my coffee a bit longer. Nothing quite like hot coffee on a cold winter morning. I drink it straight. It reminds me of living in a way. It can be bitter, but it's beautiful ultimately. Once I finish my coffee, I take the time to clean everything up, do my dishes, and then spend much of the rest of my day shoveling snow and repairing and reinforcing my door. I take breaks for the bathroom and to make and eat lunch, but by the time I'm through with it all, the sun is beginning to set. So I move inside, lock and bar the door behind me, and start up dinner. I'm cooking up some deer sausage from a kill I made a bit back. I figure deer sausage with some rice and beans isn't that bad. By the time I'm through, I can barely move from all the food I've eaten. Looking over at Benjamin, I see he seems quite content as well. I take him outside to go to the bathroom before locking up for the night. Turning off all the lights, I then head back to where it takes no time at all for the world to disappear around me.
Thump, 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 thump.
What the hell is that? Slowly, I force myself up before turning on some lights and heading for the noise. To my shock, the barricade on the door is cracked. The barricade is only made of wood, but it's a large piece of lumber. I make a point to add getting a metal bar for the barricade on my to-do list for tomorrow. There isn't any thumping at this point, but it's clear someone or something is trying to get inside my home. I grab my rifle, just in case, and peek through the windows. There doesn't appear to be anything. Granted, my windows aren't large enough for anyone to fit through. They're so small, I'm not so worried about any real sort of threat getting inside that way. The best way is through the front door, and something seems like it wants in. The rest of the night I sit in my chair, covered up, my rifle next to me, and pass out as best as I can. When I awake, it's morning. I'm guessing there was no more thumping, or maybe I was too tired to notice. I prep breakfast before taking the large piece of wood I slid in a slot as the barricade off and opened the door. I can't explain what I saw. My door is somewhat broken, and I decide I'll head to town today and get a proper barricade. Maybe even a steel door of some kind, after I take care of the snow. It isn't supposed to snow again until tomorrow, so I do just that. Most of my day is spent getting much of the heavier door and replacing the frame and barricade. The door I have is steel, but it is painted in such a way to match the look of the cabin. It isn't perfect, but it'll do to be far more secure. By the time I get home, I have just enough time to fix the door, replace the frame, and set it all up with my new barricade before making dinner and taking Benjamin out for his nightly business. As soon as that's over, I head straight to bed, barricading my door before I do. We'll get some sleep tonight, Benjamin. One way or another. We'll get some damn sleep because nothing is getting through that door. It is with that I pass out, blissfully unaware of the world around me. The next morning I awoke well rested and surprised to find I wasn't awoken by any real noise or banging on my door. Perhaps whatever animal had been doing it simply gave up after the first couple of nights. I did my normal routine of breakfast and soon after took Benjamin out for a walk after locking up. I let him do his business and we played a bit, enjoying the solitude and the beautiful view as we did. It was nice out here. Occasionally you'd get some wild animal aggressively trying to get into your home, but they were usually just hungry and often didn't pose a real threat. Sure, you get stories of people who come from their homes or wherever and there's like a boar or a bear or something that broke in and raided their fridge, but more often than not those people survive and don't experience such a thing again. At worst, they fix their doors, maybe get a weapon for it, and usually that is that. They live the rest of their lives in peace. I don't really blame an animal for wanting food, but generally, you aren't going to see a bear wandering around in winter. So I'm a bit perplexed in some manner as to what was big enough to mess up my previous door. I don't dwell on this though, cause it might just freak me out. I just continue to play with Benjamin for the rest of the day. We head back in that evening on account of the fact that it's supposed to snow again, and tonight a winter storm is supposed to be here, and probably will be here for the next week or so. I figure that'll mean a lot of shoveling on my part, but I'm more than prepared for winter out here, seeing as I've been out here for most of my life. It's hard to believe I used to dwell more in the city when I was younger. I eventually got tired of that in society and decided to move out here around 25. Now, I'm 45,
and well versed in living in the wilderness. My only regret is that I didn't take to doing this sooner. Life is peaceful out here, for the most part, I think to myself. It's quite nice, and you'll never have any real problems with people here. Walking inside my cabin, I lock up and barricade my door before making some dinner for myself and feeding Benjamin as well. I stay up after doing dishes and watching some television before finally turning out the lights around 10 and heading to bed.
Thump, thump, thump.
Benjamin, I think we have a guest again. What do you say we greet him? Benjamin shoots up, already on edge from the thumping at the door, as I grab my rifle and head out towards the living room. I still don't see anything through my windows, and so I look out my peephole. It's dark and there doesn't appear to be anything there. As soon as I said that, I saw a large eye that took me by surprise and made me jump back for a minute. This was followed by another loud and persistent thumping on my door. Once I got over the initial surprise, I pounded back on my door, rifle in hand, and getting tired of being awoken in the middle of the night, I addressed whatever animal was out there. Listen here, I am tired and cranky, and I'm sick of waking up in the middle of the night. You can bang all you want, but you won't be getting through my door. There was a silence for a moment, and Benjamin was on edge as he waited to hear something back. After a few minutes, we thought maybe we'd scared the thing off. Still, to be safe, I waited for another hour. Nothing. Finally, we went back to bed and I passed out again. I shot up and ran for the door at the sound of a smashing and truck alarm blaring. I looked out the window, but couldn't see well through the snow. A few seconds go by when I suddenly see my truck flying towards the side of my cabin. I fell back before the truck impacted the side of the cabin. The cabin shook and Benjamin barked like mad as I scrambled to my feet and saw pieces of glass from my windows on the floor now. Holding up my rifle, I looked through the scope but saw nothing. I wanted to go out, but decided it was for the best not to. Whatever had destroyed my truck threw it with enough force that it hit the side of my cabin. I'd never encountered any sort of animal that could do such a thing. Based on the eye that I saw, I'd say whatever was out there couldn't be human at all. I quickly pulled out my phone and began dialing the cops. I was on the line when I heard a loud howling of some kind. The dispatch asked where I lived and what was happening, and all I could muster up was the courage to say to get over here, giving them my address along with that message, before hanging up. It took a few hours, but soon the sheriff arrived and knocked on my door. He asked what in the hell had happened, and I explained to him everything from the past few nights leading up to this moment. Perplexed, he had looked around and told me to stay put. I waited, rifle in hand, for his return. After a half hour or so, he returned and informed me that he wasn't sure what the hell was going on, but he'd take a report and come back in the morning when he could see better to check things out. He informed me that I should lock and barricade my door, and if I hear anything else out of the ordinary to call him. He then handed me a card with his number on it, and soon after left. I didn't sleep the remainder of the night, but I also never heard anything else outside either. Morning finally came, and true to his word, the sheriff returned and we both looked around the place more thoroughly. It was snowing like crazy and we didn't really find much. The sheriff reassured me, saying it's likely the snow covered up any tracks that was made, and that I should think about putting up some sort of security system or maybe some cameras that snap pictures at the first sight of movement. I agreed and soon after departed from the cabin. I spent the rest of the day making calls to my insurance company and arguing about how I had no clue what destroyed my truck. I also made some repairs to the side of my cabin, and after having my truck towed away, I soon pulled my four-wheeler out of the shed and headed to get some cameras. By the time I returned, the night was coming fast, so I installed and tested my cameras before having Benjamin go to the bathroom, and then I locked up my ATV in my shed and went inside my cabin. I made dinner and tried to relax as best as I could, but I was quite shaken from the previous night's events. I kept my rifle close to me at all times because now I was occasionally peeking out my peephole. I saw nothing and I barricaded my windows at this point in an attempt to keep the snow out. The night was long and very little sound had me up, checking my door every time. I was tired, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep just yet. I was sure whatever was out there would be back. If not tonight, tomorrow night. If not then, at some point down the road for sure. Sure as shit, I started to doze off when I heard a loud thumping at my door. I got up and slammed back once again. Go away. If you don't, I'll shoot you myself. There was a howling, followed by an even louder thud as I felt my floor shake. I held my rifle up at the door and waited as I heard 2 more thuds. This was followed by a loud howling before everything went silent again. The thought crossed my mind to call the sheriff again, but as things had fallen silent, I decided not to. I was scared for sure, but the thing had been able to get through my door yet, so I didn't feel like I needed to call him immediately. I wasn't in immediate danger just yet as long as that store stayed strong. It was about 4 in the morning, and so I made some coffee and waited for Benjamin for daylight to come. Once the sun crested over the mountains, and it was bright enough, I unlocked my door and headed out with Benjamin to check out my door, also the cameras. The door seemed well, aside from an indentation. The frame seemed undamaged, and as such, I decided to immediately check the cameras next. Looking over the film, I was distraught. There were photos of something big. It looked about 9 feet tall, and had been throwing its shoulder into my door before leaving last night. I was in shock at the sight of this creature as it stood on 2 legs. But my cameras didn't get a good enough picture of it to tell what it really was. Walking in the direction of the creature, I tried to follow the tracks, but I was at a loss. So I decided to head back to town on my 4-wheeler and pick up some more cameras for the cabin itself, and soon after returned, setting them up in places where I would get a much better view of the thing if I returned. After installing the cameras, I worked on the repair to the side of my cabin some more. It was coming along slowly, but it was definitely coming along well. Once again, night came. Benjamin and I headed inside, and I made some dinner for us both. After locking and barricading the door behind me, I hoped tonight, by some miracle of God himself, I'd hopefully get some real rest. To my surprise, I did just that. After heading to bed, I didn't hear a sound outside except for the snow. Once morning came, I felt refreshed and a little bit better. I received a call from the sheriff, who I informed I was okay still, before explaining I had done as he'd said with the cameras. I told him I caught something I didn't know how to explain on my cameras before having him over and showing him the photos myself. The sheriff suggested something odd to me. He said he didn't normally jump to such far-fetched conclusions, but he thought there was a chance it could be a Bigfoot. I laughed at the sheriff at first before I noticed he wasn't laughing at all. You can't be serious, right, Sheriff? The sheriff nodded at me quite seriously before telling me he'd seen some strange things in his time, and out in the woods of Washington, he'd investigated other claims of strange happenings in his long career. He said they'd gone unexplained, but he'd seen tracks before and he was convinced Bigfoot existed. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't this time. Well, what the hell am I supposed to do about this if you are right, Sheriff? He shook his head, unsure of what to say before putting his hand on my shoulders and telling me to install those other cameras, double-check my locks and reinforcements, and keep my gun close just in case. He left me with the words, if this thing is aggressive as it seems, I'd need all the help I could get. He offered to stick around for the night, and I almost declined before thinking, I'd be better safe rather than sorry, right? The next couple of nights went by quickly. I slept and not a thing had happened. It didn't return. It was nearing the end of the week and the snow was finally beginning to let up, and when I shook the sheriff's hand and told him thank you before he finally went on his own way, he said if anything happened again, feel free to call him, and he'd head this way. We'd work on the cabin over the past couple of days, and had just about fully repaired the side, and we almost replaced the windows. I was feeling slightly more relaxed as I hadn't seen the creature in about 3 nights or so. That relaxation lasted as long as it took me to check the cameras. It seemed the last few nights, the sheriff and I had not been alone as we believed ourselves to be. On the cameras, I saw the thing still not very clearly several times. In some of the photos, it simply sat and waited, observing the cabin. In others, it looked inside the windows of the sheriff's vehicle before slinking back into the trees, waiting. At one point, a time for which I'm sure we're both still awake and talking, you could see the creature listening in, its ears pressed to the door. I never got a completely clear shot, however, and so I didn't have definitive proof of what it looked like. My first thought was to call the sheriff back, but upon further reflection, I decided against it. This thing was intelligent. It was waiting for me to be alone again. It knew I wasn't, so it didn't attack any of those nights. If I was going to lure it out again, and at the very least get a better shot of it, I need to stay alone until it came out to see me. So that's what I did. I made a real meal, and soon hit the bed early. I waited quietly, hoping to hear the thing again. I had locked my door and barricaded my camera. I made sure it was running. I was prepared to find proof of the thing that stalked me. I had a feeling I'd do just that. With enough patience, at some point late in the night, I must have drifted off because before I knew it, the morning was upon me again. Waking up, I went to the kitchen to make breakfast and noticed it was still snowing. I checked the weather, which seemed to indicate there was another system that had developed overnight and had heavier snowfall, and that we would be stuck here in the snow longer than anticipated. Thinking nothing of this, I ate breakfast and headed out to check the cameras with Benjamin happily running alongside me. It was only now I realized a problem. The cameras were no longer there. I found them destroyed, all over the yard. Any film I recovered only showed black or nothing on it at all but snow. It was almost as if this thing had spotted the cameras, avoided them, and soon after destroyed them one by one, leaving the husk of the cameras behind as a message. That's not what happened though, right? I mean, there's no way that Bigfoot or whatever the hell this thing is was that intelligent, right? I tried to shake off the thought before going inside and calling the sheriff. It didn't take long for him to arrive, and we discussed what had happened. I'm at a loss, Sheriff. I'm not sure what to do now. If I get more cameras, this thing might just destroy them again. I mean, I don't know if it can climb, or what it can do, or what it's capable of, or what it's not incapable of. If I have you or anyone stay nearby, it likely won't show up again. You can't stick around forever, though. What do you think? The sheriff seemed every bit amiss at a loss as I was. He was confused and unsure of what to try next, but he agreed. Getting another camera would likely be a waste of money. Perplexed by the intelligence of this thing, the sheriff said to call him if I noticed anything else odd or if the thing attacked again. Soon after, he drove away, looking every bit as confused as I felt. What was I going to do? There was no way I could simply ignore this thing. There was no way I could do anything to catch it in the act. I had never felt so hopeless in my entire life as I did at this point in time. Deciding not to get too down on myself, as it wouldn't help my situation anyways, I went about my day shoveling snow and chopping some firewood before ending the day playing with Benjamin and trying to stay relaxed. I knew panicking wasn't going to help me or anything, and at this point, I need all my wits about me every night until this was over. Locking things up, I ate some dinner and spent the rest of the night watching some movies and trying to relax as much as possible. To my surprise, I awoke to find it was 9 in the morning. I'd woken much later than usual and found Benjamin licking me and trying to get me outside probably so he could go to the bathroom. I got up and let Benjamin do his business before looking around the property. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I checked my shed. The lock had been broken off and my four-wheeler was missing. Shit, I thought to myself. This thing wanted me stranded completely. I wasn't too worried. I had plenty of food to make it through the winter, but the thought that I was stranded did leave me with some sense of unease. I searched for my vehicle for quite some time before finally finding it an hour away, wrapped around a tree, down a steep drop-off. Heading back home, I called the sheriff and explained to him what had happened. I insisted he didn't stick around, however, as the only way this Bigfoot was going to show itself, if that even what it was if I was alone. With no more than my dog. He said he wouldn't stay, but I need to show him where my four-wheeler was found. So I did, and the remainder of my day was spent with him examining the damage and making a report before leaving. This was insane, I thought to myself, when I finally settled in for the night at my cabin. I had an uneasy feeling as I went to bed. Something didn't feel right about tonight. It wasn't just that this thing was slowly making moves to isolate me. It was also that it seemed to know I had nowhere else to go. It was as though it had chosen me off of the basis that it knew I didn't have anyone else to stay with or live with. How long had this thing been watching me? Had it been days, weeks, months? I hesitated to think the last part, but had it been years? Whatever the case may be, it knew exactly when to come out so it wouldn't be seen. It was highly intelligent, and I was out of options other than to wait for it to try to enter my home again and deal with it accordingly. I pondered what I'd do if that happened until, finally, I drifted off to sleep. Thump, 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 thump. The banging was louder than ever, and I shot up out of bed. Running for my phone, I immediately called the sheriff. The phone rang as I did. I could see the steel bending on my barricade. Hello? Sawyer? Are you there, Sawyer? Sawyer, is that your dog? Sawyer?
Update. It was in half an hour or so before I arrived at the cabin. There was blood and the sight of a mangled steel door in the floor. Looking around, I noticed the foam was ripped out of the wall and in pieces. Walking further into the cabin, the lights were dead and it was in the back room. Amongst other destroyed doors, I found Sawyer, gun clutched to his chest, terrified. It took a bit of persuasion, but I finally got Sawyer to hand me the gun, and I soon called up the crime scene and brought him down to the station. After giving him some cocoa and giving him some time to come down from the shock, he explained to me that he awoke to the sound of violent banging. He then explained how he tried to call me, but as soon as he dialed, his door was beginning to give away, so he headed for it. After much struggling, he backed off when he realized the door was going to fall. He didn't want to be crushed by it, so as soon as the thing entered his home, his dog Benjamin jumped at it, and I bit at it before being thrown off, getting up and barking again. He said he emptied every bullet he had into the thing as it ripped the phone out of the wall and crushed it. I stopped Sawyer and asked if he killed the thing. He said he grabbed the gun. He had his backup in his case and emptied every shell he could into it, but it only howled, turned away, and ran off into the night. Sawyer seemed quite convinced the stalker was alive and well. We staged a few more stakeouts and I left him alone, per his wishes, for several nights after. Nights turned into weeks, which turned into months, and there was never a word or another harassment from this thing again. Sawyer and I became friends, bonded by our involvement in this case. He still says he has PTSD to this day from the events. But since repaired his cabin, completely lives alone and in the same spot. Although he fears his attacker, he refuses to move. We are still friends to this day.